All righty. I think a few people can hear, but I'm going to let our collection of lovely guests flow in. Hello, everyone. And I imagine you know what you're at, but welcome to your Forbidden Science Mentoring with Gregg Braden, the lovely Gregg Braden, who it is an honor to be here with. We'll be gathered here to ask some questions. We're going to use chat. Jim, our lovely tech, has set up this really cool function with this webinar of Q&A. And if you click the Q&A button, or maybe I can click the Q&A button, but there's a way that you can put your question up and other folks can also vote for what questions they want to get answered most. So I encourage everyone to use that function because we can kind of consolidate topics. And that way we can get to more things while we have him here. Following Jeffrey's lead, drop your, say hello, where you're calling in from. And yes, this is being recorded right now, Jeffrey. Now, before we get into our questions and all of that beautiful jazz, I would like to pass the mic to Gregg to let him say a few words about this incredible course.
Yeah, well, I'm just going to say first of all, this is being recorded. So some of you may be seeing this after the fact. This is Friday, the 28th. It is morning. I am coming to you from our Studio B instead of the Studio A outside of Santa Fe, New Mexico. And I got to tell you, we are experiencing a late spring blizzard here right now. It was 80 degrees earlier this week. And we got up this morning to a beautiful white out. The wind is howling and the snow, it's not snowing down, it's snowing sideways. That's how hard the wind's blowing. So I'm excited to be with you all today. This is a mentoring. It is, it's part of your course. I want to thank everyone for taking the course. And at this point, many of you have completed the course. So I'm honored that you would share that course with us. And I want to really honor the intent of the mentoring. It was designed for people to either go deeper or ask about uncertainties with content relevant to the course. There are a million things we could talk about. Now, I'm happy to talk about anything. It's your mentoring, but I'm going to invite you just to keep in mind this is less of a Q&A and more of a mentoring with regard to the modules. We covered a lot of content, a lot of material in these modules, and we could only cover and go so deep in, they were originally designed to be 20-minute modules. I always go over and Nassim always goes over. So they're longer modules, there's a lot in there. So if there are things that you'd like to have clarified or in terms of what I was saying or what it means in our lives or our world today, I'm just going to encourage you to kind of focus on those kinds of things. And as Dee said, what often happens, we might have 10 questions that are all asking the same question. They're coming at it from different ways. So I think to be efficient, what we'll do, we've got a team looking these questions over behind the scenes. So team behind the scenes, thank you. And we may just look at the theme of the questions and then be able to speak to that theme, answering many questions in one answer. So Andy, I want to thank, I'm so used to working with Dee Myers, and who you know very well.
I do know her very well.
Yeah, I won't out you guys, but I can tell that you know her very well.
I am her kid, so yeah, I've known her my whole life.
Okay, yeah, you've known her your whole life. So, and she's on my Zoom screen. She always occupies the box where you are right now. Yep. So I'm very accustomed to saying D, and I apologize.
Don't
so
worry,
Andy, yeah. Well, Andy, thank you for keeping us organized today, for narrating, for collating many of the questions, and I'm going to turn it back to you, and we'll be off to the races here.
Fabulous. Okay, we already are starting to get some questions trickling in, so thank you so much. One thing I do think I want to start with, simply because when we've been in watch parties, this has come up, and I've already seen one little question come up in chat. Be sure to use the question and answer function. That way I can definitely see them, is about the fractal time calculator. And they're saying, I had difficulty with the fractal time clock. Not sure whether the number I get is my age or the year. But yeah, I kind of want to just pass it to you. Tell us a little bit more about using the best way.
Yeah, well, the fractal time calculator, it has been controversial. It was very healing for me to be able to build this for you all. It was originally, just to back up a little bit, it was originally designed and built right before the 2012 phenomenon in the world with two modalities. There were two modalities that we could use. One of those modalities was for the events of the world, and one was for our personal lives. After 2012, the algorithm changed. And to simplify things, we put it up on the website. It is now primarily used for personal reference. These are personal events in your life. And it can be used, that one modality can be used in a couple of different ways. It can be used if you enter at your age. And I use it that way all the time. It can also be used if you enter the year in your life in which something happened. So the idea, if you're not familiar with what we're talking about, if you're watching this, you're not familiar, the idea back in the 80s, I began to think of time and the fractal nature of the universe in a very, very different way by merging them together. So the concept that time could be fractal was not commonly accepted back then. I caught a lot of flack and lost a lot of credibility, to be honest, because of this. Now it's commonly accepted and openly acknowledged in the scientific community that time is fractal. So it wasn't back then, and I didn't do it through a white paper and a peer-reviewed journal. I did it through a book and made the algorithm itself available, and then took that algorithm, created a calculator on the website so that you didn't have to go through the manual, all the manual operations. So, and I got to tell you, the guy that the guy that built the calculator for the website was he's a programmer, and he was just blown away. He didn't think it was real. And so while he was building it, he started doing this stuff for himself, entering his own numbers. Then he got so lost in his own life cycles that he got behind on the project, and it's a whole story behind that. So the idea is that any event in our lives sets into motion a pattern of energy that will repeat on a predictable cyclic basis that can be known and calculated. So the event sets into motion in the field that Nassim talks about a ripple, a wave of patterns in space-time, and they will repeat on a cyclic basis. The cycles must follow the natural rhythms that determine how things work in our lives, in our world, in our universe, and we are part of that. We're not separate from that. So, when you have an emotionally significant event, this is the key. For you, what is an emotionally significant event? It can be a joyous event. It doesn't have, people are asking me, does it have to be bad things? No, it doesn't have to be bad things at all. It's things that are important to you, that because the emotional significance is what sets into motion the pattern of energy. If it's not significant, it may not have that effect. So it can be a very beautiful thing. It can be, most people are entering about relationships. Betrayal is not such a joyous thing. But those, when we are deeply betrayed, and that's one of the examples I think I give in the course, when we're deeply betrayed in life, that is a powerful emotional component. It sets into motion that pattern, and I want to be really clear about this. If you haven't gotten this far in the course, the pattern sets up only the conditions for the betrayal, or the conditions for the joy, or the conditions for the abundance, or the conditions for the loss. It doesn't mean it will happen. It's not predicting an event. Excuse me. It is showing when the conditions are optimum for in other words, there's a good chance but it doesn't mean that the event will happen. There's a good chance. It means the conditions are present for this to happen again. And you can go through the fractal time calculator. You enter the age of your significant emotional event or the year in which it happened, and press enter on the website. And the number that comes up is the first fractal of that event. That means it's the first fractal where the opportunity, the conditions are present for this to repeat. And the reason this is important, because between the time where every cycle has a beginning and an end, and when one cycle ends before the next begins, there is a period of time where neither exists. It's called the choice point. And these are the moments when it's opportune to do just that, to make a choice in our lives, to make a change in our lives. Now, obviously, you can choose at any time. We can all choose at any time. But if you want to stack the deck in your favor for a little less resistance, the choice points are optimum. In our lives, choice points can be much briefer when we're talking about events of the world, like war and peace, or 5,000-year cycles. The events, the choice point is much greater. For a perfect example, December 21st, 2012 was the end of a 5,125-year long cycle. The next cycle doesn't begin at the turn of a dime. There's a buffer point. It's a 36-year long buffer, and we're living that buffer right now until the year 2030. So we're actually living the choice point where we have the greatest opportunity to make changes in the patterns from the past that that maybe have served us in the past but are no longer working for us. And you don't need me to tell you that. I mean, the world looks like it's turned upside down. It's obvious we're in the choice points for all kinds. I mean, social, political, economic, energy, climate, you name it. So so that theme plays out in our personal lives as well. And it's a pretty cool thing to be able to see if you find that you have patterns in relationships. Maybe your partners are leaving you all the time, or maybe you're leaving them all the time, or maybe you find that mysteriously your relationships seem to top out after a precise number of years. 7 years is common for a lot of people. 7-year relationships, 3-year relationships. And you say, well, now why is that? You know, and then you start going back and you look at your past relationships and you see these patterns, and then the calculator begins to tell you when you can reasonably expect those patterns coming up in the future. If you're in a relationship and you want that relationship, it's an opportunity to look deeply into those patterns and into the thinking and the feeling and the conditions, consciously and subconsciously, that underlie those. And that's beyond the course, or the scope of what we're doing in this course. We address that in other places where we talk about the mirrors of relationship and what our mirrors, our relationships are telling us. The book, The Divine Matrix, in part 3 of The Divine Matrix, identifies the first, I believe it's the first, I wrote the book in 2008. So I think it's the first 3 or the first 5 of the Essene mirrors of relationships. So those are available. And if you're doing into the pure human courses, 4-day events that we're offering, we go over every one of those mirrors in detail, profound information. So it's beyond the scope of this course, but those mirrors will help to understand and give insight into the patterns that the fractal time calculator is helping you understand. So these, do you think that address the details, or do we need to go into specifics on how we're using the numbers, or what do you think?
I think you covered a lot of ground, and I think you got to like 99% of it. One person did ask one little tiny thing, which is, does it need to be an exact date, or can it be rough, like roughly that date?
It can be, usually it can be either. And because the cycle is going to reflect the specificity of the date. So for example, and I think I shared this, I know I share it in the book, I think I share it in the course. My first union paycheck when I was 16 years old, I put the age of 16, or I could put the year that was in there. It didn't have to be the month. So, and then the fractal time calculator then will give me an answer that is equivalent to that degree of specificity. So it'll say, if I said 16, and I don't have it in front of me right now, but maybe my next fractal would be at the time where I could expect to see that kind of life-changing abundance might be the age of 23. It wouldn't say what month, and there's 12 months in there. So it wouldn't tell me if it's early in my 23rd year or later, but that's the way it would work. When I was designing this, working with other organizations in terms of global events, what we found, so for example, the first time that America was surprised and attacked on our own soil was in Pearl Harbor. And when I entered the month and the date for that, which is a historical fact, and then we went 4 fractals forward, interestingly, the number and the date was September 2001, of when we could reasonably expect the conditions would be present for America to be surprised and attacked on American soil. And we all know it was September 2001 was 9/11. So I was kind of blown away by how accurate that was. And that's when I started going back and applying it to all kinds of stuff. And man, I'll just tell you, I mean, I've said this before, don't do it like right before you're going to bed at night, because you'll be up all night entering events from your life and your kids' lives and relationships from high school, and how many fractals forward, you broke up in high school and now you're getting a divorce, and you're 50, and you think, are they related? And you find out that one is exactly a fractal. It's maybe like 6 fractals or something, because the same patterns are playing out until we change those patterns. So yeah, it's just how specific you want the the answer to be. If you're going to go for months, I believe there are general instructions on the website. I don't know if they're specific enough. The month has to be entered numerically. So I would just stay with the year or with the age. And I think it's going to pretty much put you in the ballpark for everything that you need to know.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Greg. Thank you so much for unpacking all of that. That was incredible information. And I definitely feel empowered on exactly how to use it now.
Okay, good.
So thank you very much. This is going to be a different gear shift, but I really love this question. A few other people are also really interested. Question from Mary. She says, I'm curious about hearing more about using the quantum in meditation and how to best use it to manifest the highest and best for myself and others.
My audio clicked out when you were reading. Okay. So she's Mary. First of all, Mary, thank you for the question. And she's interested in understanding how to use the what?
The quantum, kind of like looking into the different scales of from the tiny atom to the whole expansive universe. And also kind of think using the fractal element inside of this meditation to.
The question is how to use that?
How to use the quantum, or just about using the quantum.
Well, it's a little bit different way of asking the question. But what I'll say is you're already using it. So you're using it because everything is connected to everything else. And because we are part of the field, we are functioning on the quantum. Physicist David Bohm talked about something called the implicate and the explicate order. And we are both the implicate and the explicate by they're the things you can see, the things you can't see, the things that are obvious, the things that are less than obvious. And the beauty of the way this field works, and this is, I think, the focus of Nassim's work, is that you don't have to know the details to be effective in the outcomes and the applications. It's because we are part of, rather than separate from the field, we don't have to figure out how to access the field. rather we can put our energy into honing the quality of our meditations and our prayers, whatever it is that is happening with us and within us is now influencing the field, because we are the field. And again, I think this is probably one of the biggest shifts in thinking, Andy, because so many, first of all, the idea that there's a field underlying all existence, for many people, it was an esoteric metaphor, for generations, that everything is connected. The idea of the scientific validation only came about in the year 2012. And even with that, the scientists are still doing this. They're saying there's a field out there that connects all things. The Nobel Prize in 2022 was for the validation of the phenomena of entanglement, which means everything's connected to everything else. And it's connected because there's a field connecting it. So, but the idea is still separating us from the field. So I think the shift in thinking for me, and I still, work with this, every cell of our bodies, the 50 trillion or so cells in our bodies are made up of about 100 trillion or so atoms. And every one of those atoms, this very nanosecond right now, those 100 trillion atoms and the 50 trillion cells in my body, they are not constant. They are emerging and collapsing into the field. I'm coming to you today from the command deck of the mothership. Okay, you can see the mothership behind me. So my cells on the mothership are emerging and collapsing into the field, and so are yours, Mary, and everyone else's. And this is a really, really powerful. It's a very powerful embracing of this fact, because it means we must be responsible for what we become. Isn't limited to the perimeter of the flesh on our bodies. It cannot be. And you named it. You just told me why. On the quantum level. On the quantum level, these clothes don't make any difference. My skin doesn't make any difference. So what we become in our prayers and our meditations, the impact, the influence is not limited to this, this body. And the quality of our prayers and meditations determines the degree of that impact and the degree of that influence. Some of it's less, some of it's greater. For example, the TM studies, we talked about this in a fireside chat recently. TM studies, transcendental meditation studies that were done back in the 70s. And again, I do this off the top of my head. I think it was Fairfield, Iowa, is where the TM headquarters is based. Andy, can you fact check me on that, please?
Let me go Google.
I think it's Fairfield, Iowa. What they found is that when people were trained in the techniques of TM, and then they went to cities that were had populations of 10,000 or more people, as they became the peace and the serenity that results from the TM within themselves, the conditions of those communities changed. Emergency hospital room visits declined. Traffic accidents declined. Violent crimes against people declined. And it was the first scientific study, not just intuitive, it was scientifically done study, showing that there was a statistical difference. It means, they weren't just eyeballing it. They were, they had numbers, they could validate it, and they said these are statistically significant changes in the community that correlate with the times these people are doing these things. They couldn't say the people made the peace happen, but they said they're beyond chance, statistically significant, and there's a high correlation between the time of the good things in the community and the good things coming from the TM. That can only happen when our inner experience is not limited to our own bodies. It's radiating into the field. So a long answer to a short question, all to say that everything you do, Mary and me and everybody every day in our lives, we are constantly influencing the world around us, and we're in communication with that world, and the world's communicating back the effects through the relationships that we see in our lives, the quality of the relationships and the people that we find ourselves surrounded with. And when I hear that, excluding family, because family you've got no matter what. So it's not like you drew the family in. Your family's your family. You're with them no matter what. But the other people, the quality of people that you will draw in the community, in the workplace, and the quality of the conversations, it's all reflecting on the quantum level what it is that we think, feel, and emote. In other words, we must become in our lives the things that we choose to experience in the world. And that's a single sentence to sum up everything that we're saying here. And it's a very different way of thinking. I was just with physicists not long ago, and they're still doing. When I was at the CERN superconducting super collider, the scientists that announced the fact there's a field underlying all existence, they prove that, and they're still saying, yeah, that field out there, it's because we are so conditioned to think and act and believe from the place that we are separate, not only from one another, but we're separate from this field, that somehow we've got to do things to access the field, to get our prayers into the field and all of that. So it's a very different way of thinking. And I think we have an opportunity now with a younger generation to begin to share with our young people at a very early age the fact that they are part of, rather than separate from, the world that they find themselves in, that everything that they do has an effect on other people and other things, plants, animals, the world around them. And what that does at a very early age, it begins to instill a sense of responsibility in a healthy way. Rather than the generation I was brought up in said, that we are so separate from our world. When I was a kid back in the 60s and 70s, I remember our trash would be collected weekly, and then they would throw it away into the rivers and the oceans. They would throw it away, thinking we are so separate from the natural world, and that the oceans and the rivers are so big. So when you throw something away, where is away? And when you ask a young person, where is away? They really begin to understand you just rearrange it from point A to point B. It doesn't go away when you're throwing it into the oceans. And we're seeing that now with, islands of plastic waste showing up in the Pacific and all those things. So yeah, I think it's an opportunity we have to really open the door to our young people of thinking of themselves as part of the world, and that the choices that they make are part of either the problem or part of the solution. And that's a very, very different way of thinking.
Absolutely. Oh, thank you for that beautiful answer. Yeah, I think that definitely gets to the core of it, is that every moment is the quantum, every moment is the field.
Yeah.
And yeah, the young people thing, I went to a hippie elementary school. That it's so true. It like the framing is so different. And then you feel like a happy responsibility, not like a negative, like oppressive responsibility.
Well, so I'm just going to follow up on that a little bit. And it was really good news. Many of you know, and some of you may have even been with me on a recent journey into the Holy Lands in December. We go usually every December into the Holy Lands, and we call it the Holy Land Tour because it encompasses the geography of an ancient part of the land rather than the national boundaries and the political boundaries. So it is, it's everything. And we were really encouraged. We had the opportunity to visit new schools that are being built and that are being supported, where Palestinian boys and girls, Christian boys and girls, Jewish boys and girls are being educated together. So first of all, crossing those boundaries and having your friends in school be of the belief that your parents thought were your enemies is a very powerful thing. Now, in addition to that, they are teaching the principles that we're talking about right now, that we are part of rather than separate from the world, that everything is connected. And they're actually using some of my books as as the and some of Bruce Lipton's books and some of Nassim's work and Lynn McTaggart in the field and on all those things. Very progressive form of education. And it's an experiment. But the schools, there are multiple schools that are being built. And the young people are, these ideas are much more aligned with what they feel to be true. It makes sense to them. And so there is a generation, at least in some parts of the world, that are now embracing the ideas of the connectivity and the universal nature of these deep truths. And those pilot schools, if they can do it there, we can do it anywhere. And they began doing it out of necessity of survival. If the next generation doesn't heal, there can't be, they can't continue with what they're doing right now. So they say necessity is the mother of invention. Out of necessity was the dream to bring these young people together. And I saw it myself. You know, we go at sunset into some of the parks and you would see young people drumming at sunset, and they are Coptic, they were Christian, they were Muslim, they were Jewish, and they don't care. And they understand the hurt from their parents, the previous generation, because they hear the story, but they didn't experience it directly. So they're one generation removed from the original hurt. I mean, there's still hurt there now, but they're ready to move on. They want to join the world. They want to build, you know, computers and computer games and create music and play soccer and be part of the world. They don't want to live a life of war. And so that's, I think it's the hope, is the next generation. And it's true for the world. It's true for us in America. And that's why the very troubling efforts to subvert the teachings in public schools and to indoctrinate young people into the ways of thinking that have nothing to do with their success in the world and has a lot to do with the political ideology. Ideologies are multiple that reflect the visions and the agendas of a handful of people that want to change the world. But our young people, they're not being taught about the basic sciences. They're not being taught about the history of humanity, the history of the world, about their potential. And we have a lot to learn from some of these pilot programs. I'm encouraged, if it works one place, it can work everywhere. And it all begins the understanding that we are part of rather than separate from the world, and what we become influences other people in the world around us. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Gregg. Oh, that's beautiful. And like, what a cool moment. Yeah.
Andy, I have to ask, what state of the US was your hippie high school in?
Colorado. And it was a little itty bitty teeny tiny mountain elementary school. So it was like 5 to 10-year-olds every morning sitting for meditation. Instead of having regular class, we go on a hike and look for bugs. Like,
wow. Well, see, and look what an awesome woman you are. So thank you for little hippie schools.
Exactly.
But you know, well, I'm going to say this: Northern New Mexico. New Mexico is a big state with a very small population. We have 1.5 million people in the whole state, and 1 million live in one city in Albuquerque. Only 500,000 spread out through the rest of the state. Most of Northern New Mexico, I say most because we know it's over half. Parents have pulled their kids out of public schools because they don't like what's happening, and they're homeschooling. And now they're forming communities in these rural areas where parents are coming together to homeschool their kids together, going back to the basics, teaching the kids how to grow food, how to cook, how to sew. You know, boys need to know how to sew. I sew my own, you know, I can't tell you how many times I've been backstage at a gig, either music or at a speaking event, and I've had a hem come out of my pants or a jacket. And I'm back there with a needle and thread, man. People they don't think. I always carry 2-sided tape with me. I had the lining fall out of a jacket before I was doing a TV special. It was hanging below the bottom of my jacket. And I wasn't worried. I went to my briefcase. I had my 2-sided tape. pulled up that lining, taped it up, and it got me through the gig. And then I, had to take it to a tailor and get it fixed. But those are skills that have been lost. A lot of skills have been, as well as basic finances. A lot of kids don't know how, so they're teaching young people the skills, but underlying the skills is the thinking that says that we are neighbors, that we are friends, we have common values. We love the land, we love the way that we're living. We don't want to live in big cities, and we need one another for the things that we need one another for. And so over 40% of the schools now, they're homeschooling, which I think is a very, very powerful statement. It's tough for the public schools because now there's not the demand for the high quality teachers in public schools, which is why they're taking them out of the public schools to begin with. But it's what I call hippie schools. I love it. So little hippie schools are springing up everywhere, and I think it's a very cool thing. I get to go in and speak at some of these schools sometimes, and it's
so fun.
It's very sweet, very sweet. And they're smart kids, man. I got to tell you, kids without the indoctrination of YouTube and Instagram, when they're left to their own devices to entertain themselves, they are really innovative, you've got tremendous imagination, really creative. And that's why I'm really encouraged by what I see in the new generation.
That made me really hopeful. Thank you for sharing that. And yeah, it's exciting to hear that there is like a change and people are like, wait, let's communitize this.
Now, so the cool thing is when you go to the school library and on the library shelf, you see a book called The Divine Matrix by some guy named Gregg Braden. And I think, well, if I left the world today, at least this book helped this classroom. And that's a very sweet thing, very cool. So
beautiful, blessing.
Okay, so let's do more questions.
More questions.
Right.
We got another question coming in, different aspect, but also very important. I'm trying to remember what module this was, but Reverend Mark asks, you mentioned the core not rotating anymore, the core of the earth.
Yeah.
Is that connected to the pole shifting? And addendum to that, is there any information on how that may impact different aspects like people, animals, insects?
Yeah, so Reverend Mark, thank you for the question. And I'm going to say to everybody right now, this is it is probably one of the greatest deceptions that have ever been perpetrated on the people of the world, not just America right now, because there are dynamics happening in our planet that are not being acknowledged publicly. The real scientists, scientific community knows what's going on. They don't have a platform. Their platform are these peer-reviewed journals that are read, very technical journals that are read by a handful of people. Most people don't know what's going on. The dynamics between the core of our, and I'm a geologist, so this is why I'm very passionate about this. The dynamics between the core of our planet and the surface of our planet are what's driving climate change. And I'll tell you exactly how it happens right now. The core, if you look at a cross section of the earth, I didn't know we were going to do this, so I don't have a chart, but we've got a solid inner core that floats. It's held in suspension in a molten outer core of iron and nickel. And then we've got the mantle, and then we've got the crust. Crust is about 36 miles thick, mantle about 1,800 miles thick. Then you've got the outer core and the inner core. That inner core rotating within the liquid, the molten outer core, those ripples, that is what is creating, it's iron nickel. And that is what creates the magnetic field of our planet. So when you go look at the NASA images, you see Earth and you see these magnetic fields, magnetic lines all around the planet. And these are important because the magnetic field is what protects and shields our planet from incoming, from solar radiation, from cosmic radiation, from solar flares. And if you look at Earth, and I've got a bunch of videos, go to my YouTube channel and under Science, Policy, and Politics, there's a particular channel, and then you can see I've actually done a video, and I have another one upcoming on exactly this topic. So watch for that. But when you go to the NASA images, what you can see is here, if the sun, here, I'll do it this way. If the sun's over here, and here's Earth's magnetic fields, you'll see the magnetic fields between on this side of the Earth are actually deformed because the pressure from the solar wind and the cosmic radiation is pushing against those magnetic fields, and they're doing their job, but it's so powerful it actually deforms them a little bit. All right, so we know this. That's common knowledge, general knowledge, pretty much taught in the schools right now. What is new is that my first job, when I was hired Phillips Petroleum in Denver, Colorado in 1979. And the reason I remember this is because the Iranian hostage crisis was happening exactly when I was hired. It was a big deal that was happening then. So 79, my first job was to check out the magnetic fields of our planet. And so I've been studying this for a long time. The magnetic fields have been weakening for the last 2,000 years. Since the time of Jesus, we peaked. And we've been on a steady decline. It's a gradual decline. What's happening now is 3 weeks ago, it was in March of 2023, peer-reviewed scientific journals published the studies showing that the inner core has stopped rotating. It does this from time to time. People are asking the wrong question. They're concerned about the poles reversing, which happens only rarely. And the last well-documented reversal was about 780,000 years ago. So I don't think we're going into a reversal. And I don't think that's the issue. What happens is it's when the core slows or comes to a rest. Now the dynamic between the core and the mantle is no longer happening the way that it has in the past. The magnetic fields become weak. What that means is we have now more solar radiation reaching the planet. We have more solar wind reaching the planet that heats up the magma and actually increases the seismic activity, the volcanic activity, and that's exactly what you're seeing right now. But here's where it gets really interesting. It heats up from underneath, it begins to heat the oceans. Now, if you know physics or chemistry, here's why this is important. Water is a powerful absorbent of gas. The colder the water, the more gas the water will hold. The warmer the water, the less gas it will hold. By the oceans warming, the oceans are releasing the CO2 levels, or the CO2 that's increasing those, the CO2 levels. It's tricky and it's delicate because it doesn't mean we should be burning fossil fuels all over the place. We need to go clean and green. And we've talked about this. We've had the technology for 70 years to do that. But how can we solve the problem if we're not honest about the problem? If we're chasing the wrong issue, climate change is a fact. We're not going to stop it. It's rhythmic. And by the way, what's happening now happens about every 12,000 years. Last time it happened was the end of the Ice Age, when temperatures rose, ice melted, sea levels rose. It changed a lot of things on the planet. It happened 12,000 years before that. We can see it in the geologic record. So I am less concerned, and I don't think we're going into a reversal. I don't think that, because often what will happen is the core will slow or stop, but it doesn't flip into a reversal. It will start back up again. And what I am concerned about is not being honest with ourselves in the media and with the public, and even the scientists that are paid. Most of them are on payrolls. Their research depends on them holding up a story. You know, they can't publish if their research doesn't support the narrative of the university or whatever it is. And we see this all the time. I used to believe that science was above all that, and I was very disappointed and disheartened as a young scientist to discover that politics plays a role in science. We all know it does. I like to think there was a place where knowledge transcended the politics, and unfortunately, that's not happening right now. Data is being cherry picked. So I want to give that background. So to your question, Reverend Mark, thank you. the core has stopped rotating, and they determined that through the seismic waves from earthquakes all over the world. As they penetrate into the earth and then they go back to the surface, the quality of those waves tells the speed of the rotation of the inner core. It has stopped temporarily. It's done this many times in the past. Now the magnetic fields are at a low point, and it makes us vulnerable to incoming. We should be doing things like hardening our power grid, so that if we get a solar flare, like happened in 1849, fortunately, we were not a technological society the way we are now. And even then, we had telegraph lines. We had telegraph lines all over the United States, well, all over the world. And that solar flare literally burned. It caught those lines on fire. There were telegraph operators whose hands were burned from the time those things happened, and they had to build a new grid. They could do that in 1849. If we lose a grid today, it's a very, very different. We lose our satellites today, it's a very different, a different proposition. And we need the leadership to help us to be honest with ourselves and acknowledge that we are living in cyclic geophysical parameters. They're not static. It's never, climate's never going to be the same way all the time, and Earth is never going to be the same way. We need to be resilient. And one of the ways of building that resilience is to harden the power grid, for example. Stop building on floodplains. Stop building 50-story condos 10 feet from the edge of the ocean. It doesn't make any sense to do that. And we've already done it. So now what we need to do is mitigate the risk and stop doing it further. And where we have done those things, do we need to protect those things? And to be honest with the public about what is happening. Now, even the things I'm saying to you, there are politics around this. There are organizations now that are popping up in other parts of the world that are taking the information that I'm sharing, and they're saying, okay, the only way that we're going to survive this thing is we've got to change the entire political system of the planet. And we need to go to a one world government. We need to go to a one world money, and we need to be governed by artificial intelligence. And they're taking the facts to promote an ideology. And I think some of them are very well intentioned. And I'm not saying they're bad people at all. I'm saying we have to be aware that the geophysical facts can often be used to justify political motivations. And if you don't know what's going on, it's really easy to get sucked into that stuff because there's a lot of fear. There's a lot of fear around it. So I don't think it's the end of the world. I don't believe that, because it wasn't the end of the world in times past. It was a time of tremendous change in times past. And I think we need to be honest with ourselves about what that change means today. Dee, do you think did we open the door to things we shouldn't talk about, or do you want to talk about them some more, or how do you feel about that?
I think you covered a lot. If you can think of more you want to add into it, more.
Let me say this. I will be doing, watch the YouTube channel. And again, there's only one Gregg Braden YouTube channel so that the data can't be hijacked. And I will be doing an entire video based on this content that we're talking about right now. But there is other information out there on the YouTube channel where we've talked about the CO2 levels are not the problem. And we're teaching our young people to demonize carbon. So to hate and to fear oil, to hate and fear carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. CO2 is what gives life to our forest and our planet. And to hate and demonize carbon in general, which is what we're based out of. So they're being taught that we need technology to replace the carbon that is us. And it's all based on these false assumptions and the false premise. So CO2, I'll just summarize this really quickly. As a geologist, in January of this year of 23, I built a little model. And I said, rather than pushing back, what would happen if we accepted all of the parameters that the UN and the World Economic Forum are putting forward, the goals that are to be met with global temperature, CO2, what would the world look like? And I've got a whole video on this on the YouTube channel. I was amazed to discover that if we were to meet the CO2 goals and the temperature goals, last time we saw this was in the Pleistocene geologic era. Pleistocene was not necessarily a pleasant time to be around. The UN goal is 150 ppm, parts per million of CO2. Right now, we're at 400 parts per million. They think that's a problem because it's higher than it's been for 20 or 50 years. And that's true. It is higher than it's been for 20 or 50 years. Here's the context. We are at historically low CO2 levels, and we are increasing those levels. But when you step back and look at the big picture, historically, the CO2 on Earth has been much higher. 400 parts per million now, we've been 800, we've been 1,000, we've been 2,000 parts per million in the Cretaceous period or the Jurassic. Most people know about Jurassic because of the movies. And during that time, yes, Earth is warmer and forests are green, they are lush. The ice has receded because Earth is warmer. The sea levels have risen, and places now that are exposed are under shallow water. That is the way it has been in geologic history. When we lose that CO2, which happened in the Pleistocene, you don't want to drop below 180 parts per million. And in the Pleistocene, when that happened, the forest died, and we need the forests to cleanse the planet. Those are the lungs of the planet. The forest died, and the ice covered about 30% of the land mass, and particularly in North America and Northern Europe, if you look at those northern latitudes. And that is when a lot of life went extinct, what's called megafauna. So the woolly mammoths and the saber-toothed tigers and humans, there were humans living during that time, and the humans that were living during that time diminished to possibly less than 100,000 on the planet. We almost went extinct. And there's a lot of indigenous stories about cosmic intervention that kept us from going extinct. That's very, very interesting, but we almost went extinct. So the bottom line is, if we were to meet the goals of temperature and carbon dioxide being proposed, we would have a Pleistocene-like planet. It's not good for us. So the question is, we're being driven toward these goals. Who's it good for? That is probably the topic of another conversation. And there's a lot that we can, and I do address that in some of the videos. So all to say that science has been hijacked, unfortunately, and marketing is so slick. And it has been so pervasive. It's done a really, really good job. And it's a delicate conversation because we do need to stop burning fossil fuels. We have the technology to do that. I'm not justifying fossil fuels, but we need to stop burning it for a different reason. And by stopping burning it, we're not going, it's very disingenuous, I believe, in my opinion, to ask people to change their lives in the entire industry, to lose their jobs, to give up their careers, to sacrifice the future of their children. And they're being told that if they do that, they're going to stop this horrible thing called climate change, when the evidence doesn't support that at all. The climate change was happening in the cycles before humans ever appeared. You can see in the ice cores, you can see the CO2 levels were much higher, and there was no industry to create it because we're not the ones that are creating this change. And it's a tough conversation, because how do you have that conversation? It's not about making somebody wrong. You don't want to make somebody wrong. And it's not about hurting other people, but it is such a pervasive narrative now that if you have that conversation, you are ostracized, you're deplatformed. I've been ostracized, obviously, deplatformed, but you asked the question. I want to be honest with you about it. And that's what the data is showing. And you can't separate what's happening at the core of our planet from what's happening with Earth in general. And it all comes down to cycles and rhythms that are not acknowledged in public right now. And these are 12,000 year cycles. You go the last 12,000 year cycle, if you want to know, it was called the Younger Dryas. Graham Hancock just did a whole Netflix special on the advanced civilization that disappeared during the Younger Dryas because of this. And then 12,000, so 24,000 years ago, there was another civilization that went through a similar change. So the cyclicity or the rhythms that are playing out here doesn't mean something is broken. It just happens in a way that is so different from the way we're taught to think about ourselves and our relationship to the world. We're taught that everything is static, that the seasons are always going to be, you plant your crops on the same day every year because the seasons are always going to be this way. And if something changes, that something is broken. And it's not that at all. It's a very, very different way of thinking. So we probably opened the doors to a lot of conversation. I don't think anything I said is new to anyone in this community because you're in my community and you've heard me say these things. Missing Links Season 1. We talked about the ice cores with the Gaia Missing Links program. We talked about the ice cores and I showed you and the videos. It's very, very clear what the rhythms are and that we're not the cause of what's happening. And you try to say that to a political candidate, nobody wants to have that conversation. So that's where we are. Thank you, Dee, for letting me. Thank you all for letting me go on about that a little bit. But I wanted to because if some people are not familiar, I wanted to be complete with the conversation if they haven't heard any of these things before.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. And yeah, there is the tenderness of that topic of like, it's complicated and it requires thoughtfulness. And I really appreciate the thoughtfulness.
Well, everybody wants to be a good person and to do what's right for their friends and their families and their kids and their community. And I'm right there, as well. And if we're being taught that the way that we choose to live is destroying the planet, of course, we want to change that. The problem is that those ideas have been radicalized to the point where young people feel empowered to vandalize anything they feel is contributing to the conditions that they're being told are ruining the planet. But it's, all you have to do is go back and you go to the video, look at the geologic record. You look at times in the Earth, the CO2 levels were 4 times as high as they are right now. And Earth was lush, green, warm, tropical. It's not the end of the world. These aren't the highest levels we've ever been. And we are, the main cause is the oceans releasing CO2 into the atmosphere because the inner core or the outer core is warming due to the lack of the magnetic shield that has protected us in the past. And the scientific papers, there are peer-reviewed papers that are telling us that right now.
Yeah. Absolutely. Thank you. No, you really unpacked a lot and that actually answered some other questions that came up too. So thank you for diving into that because it is all connected.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm just going to say this. I went on a rant for a few minutes. We're coming to the top of the hour and I'm happy to go over because I'd like to answer as many questions. If you all can stay with us, if you can't, thank you for being with us and check out the recording when it becomes available. Humanities team, you okay if we run over for a little while?
I am happy to stick around for a little bit.
Let's see how many more we can get to.
Okay. And yeah, if folks that have to leave, your recording will be sent out tomorrow. So don't worry about it at all. We got another question that is on more about the ancient artifacts that kind of connect to the course, which is from Kathy. And she says, Gregg, if beings not originally from Earth changed our human DNA about 200,000 years ago, do you believe they are still around today observing us?
Well, it's a complex question. The quick answer is yes, because some of them never left. And this is really interesting. When you go into the ancient texts, particularly if you go into the Sumerian text, this is one of the reasons parts of the Dead Sea Scrolls are so controversial. The Dead Sea Scrolls are the oldest record of the Old Testament in general, and specifically the oldest record of the first 5 books of the Old Testament, which are also the Hebrew Torah in its entirety. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. And in the Dead Sea Scrolls, they talk about the watchers who have always been and remain among us, who are neutral. They don't take sides of good and evil or light and dark or Democrat or Republican or progressive or liberal or conservative. They don't take sides, they observe. And those watchers have been with us from the time of our beginning, the time of our emergence. I have to say, we emerged. It's and relatively suddenly 200,000 years ago. And that's why I use the term emerge. It wasn't the product of a long, slow, gradual process. And we talk about this, quite a bit even in this course we do. So they also talk about our time in history. And this is one of the reasons that, the scrolls were discovered in the mid 1940s, 20th century. It took until the 90s and legal action to free the contents to the general public. And you have to say, well, what could possibly be the problem? Well, the problem is that biblical tradition, Christian Bible, has been modified to reflect the thinking of the patriarchy in a period of time. And the Dead Sea Scrolls showed the original text before they were modified. The Dead Sea Scrolls also held the history of the planet. They still do. This is part of the Holy Land tour. This is why I'm excited about this Holy Land tour that we do. And they talk about our time in history as a time of a great battle between the sons of light and the sons of darkness. And when they say sons, in that terminology, in that time, that is inclusive of both male and female. I know it's a little delicate right now because of all the gender controversy. But when they say the sons of darkness and the sons of light, that is both male and female. And it doesn't mean that the battle is a battle with guns or knives or swords. It is, I believe, it's a battle for our divinity. It's a battle for our souls that is playing out. And I think it's obvious that's happening right now. It's playing out through all the things we're talking about, through social, political, economic, military, financial, which is different than economic. It's playing out in all those battles, ultimately reflect a way of thinking. And that way of thinking is based upon the way that we feel about ourselves, our relationship to the world, our soul, and our divinity. So that battle is playing out right now. And yeah, they say that the watchers are always with us. Now, they also say that those that are responsible for our existence will return at the close of our cycle. And this is primarily, you see this in the Sumerian texts that were translated by Zecharia Sitchin. I had the honor and the privilege of touring with him before he died in the 1990s. And I think he's a brilliant scholar. I don't agree with all of his interpretation, and a lot of scholars don't. They believe he took a lot of liberties with the Sumerian text. He did a really good job of translating the text, but then his interpretations, he took a lot of liberties. So for example, he believed and preached that we are the product, we were built to be a slave race. He said that we were designed to be a slave race by the Anunnaki is the term that he used. And while I believe there's evidence that we have been enslaved multiple times in our history, I don't think that's the reason for our existence. I don't think the evidence supports that's the reason for our existence. So yes, in addition to the watchers who never left, the creators who did leave are said to, we can expect them to return at the end of the cycle. The Hopi say something very similar. The Andean traditions say something very similar through the oral traditions. The Dogon traditions talk about the return, the Egyptian traditions. So, and now we're in the process of what's called disclosure. which is the official government way of letting us know about our relationship to a greater community. And what the disclosure is now saying is that we have been being visited for about 3,000 years, and that those visitations have played a role in our history and in our politics in the past, and very probably are right now. So the artifacts that Nassim and I are showing are interesting because to some degree, we have to speculate because we have yet to translate the script. So when the script is always on one side, and then the other side is the image depicting what we assume the script is describing. We just haven't been able to read the script yet. But the astronomical evidence that we're seeing depicts very specific alignments of planets. Some of them have yet to happen and will happen probably within our lifetime. So it may be that the artifacts are telling us in their way, and the only way they could preserve that in stone thousands of years ago, what disclosure is now telling us through social media and through public discourse about our relationship to a greater community.
Absolutely. Thank you. That absolutely concisely wrapped that one up. Thank you very much for going into that.
You're welcome.
I'm going to keep plugging along because we got 36 questions in the queue. And so the next one is tying more into your work with heart math techniques and stuff like that. And it's from Denise, and she's wondering, if we don't have a heart coherence monitor, how can we tell if we are in coherence? And how important is it to have the correct breathing?
Yeah, so the correct breathing, is that what you said?
Yeah.
Yeah, so let me answer that first. There is no incorrect or correct breathing. There are techniques that are going to optimize your experience. All right, and that's what I attempted to share in the course. The thing to remember in the breathing, everyone breathes differently. Everybody has different lung capacities. I have spent most of my life at high elevation. So I find when I go to sea level to do a program and I say inhale and exhale for an audience, my inhale takes longer and my exhale takes longer than theirs often. So the key is it's the ratio. The purpose of the breathing is to relax the body and to awaken the parasympathetic nervous system. That's the purpose of the breathing, because then you're more receptive to the coherence. So the key to do that is to optimize the ratio between the inhale and the exhale. The important thing is to exhale for a period of time longer than the inhale. That is a language. It's a message to your body that you are safe, and that it's okay. You're not in fight or flight. You're not in peril. You're not being threatened. So it's okay. And if you think about it intuitively, it makes sense. The only time you would take a long, deep exhale is when you are safe and relaxed. If you're running like hell from a saber-toothed tiger, or, in the old days, or if you're working a deadline in the office that your job depends upon, that's your fight or flight in the modern world. And that fight or flight, you're not going to be taking long, deep exhales because you're going to be breathing short, shallow breaths because you're under stress. So this is the key, to exhale for a period of time longer than you are inhaling. And that action is a signal that tells the body a whole lot of stuff. It changes the chemistry that's being released. You don't have to release the adrenaline and high levels of cortisol. And that means that you are in healing mode. And that opens the door to the coherence. As far as the monitors go, and I love heart math. And heart math, they are the pioneers in what we're doing. And nobody has done what they're doing and held the scientific rigidity. They've worked very hard to keep this out of the new age community. They don't even call this a meditation, though it's a technique. It's a technique of heart-brain coherence. And I respect them for all of that. The monitor is simply a tool to help us to know when the breathing And when the feelings that we are having, the positive feeling of gratitude, for example, when those are optimum, that's what the monitor can show us. Once you know that, once you look at that and you say, oh, that's the feeling. Okay, now I know what feeling I have to get this little light to turn green. Once you know that, you don't need the monitor anymore. And if you don't have a monitor, that's fine. I think what you do is you just optimize. Your body will find the places where your body wants to be at its best. And all that stands between your body being its best and not are your perceptions. So once you are able to optimize the breathing and feelings of gratitude, whatever that means for you, and your body is going to be in that coherence. If you happen to have a friend that has a monitor, go over there someday and test yourself. Say, are my feelings and is my breathing really doing what I think it's doing? And then when it all turns green, you'll say, yep, and you never have to use it again. Now, some people like to have the validation of the gadgets, and I think that's fine. The only, if it's used as a tool and not a crutch, what I've seen people do this, like every time they start having a bad day, they have to run to the desk drawer, pull out the computer, hook up the monitor, and get into this place. I mean, you can do that, but you're giving your power away to the gadget. And I think as long as you know, and not to discount in any way the validity of the gadget. Again, I think heart math and gadgets are great, and they help a lot of people, especially, they have these monitors in schools now, elementary schools. They're teaching kids coherence. They have them in most major hospitals to help people that are in the ER, and to help people that are PTSD and all kinds of things. I mean, there's so many applications. Refugees trauma victims in the refugee camps in Jordan. The refugees are from the Syrian revolution that's happening right now. There are a million applications, and I think they're good. I just don't like to perpetuate the idea that we have to have something outside of us to be at our best inside of us. So I think I'm going to leave it that way. I think that's the way I'll answer that question.
I love that. Thank you, Greg. And that is, yeah, I've heard that. It's definitely great when you're starting, you find that bench line or benchmark, and then, yeah, but we got it all in us. On that note of all in us, Guru Nam has a really fun question about technology within us. She says, I love that the technology is within us. Do you believe that teleporting, like beam me up Scotty, is possible, and how far in the future that could be? And is there a path to get there?
Well, the answer to all three is yes. And I know scientists in the laboratory that have created the wormholes in the laboratory. I mean, they literally have opened in empty space portals that appear in the laboratory using very powerful magnetic fields. I talked about in workshops, we had photographs that I've shared that were classified and then declassified. They have been able to teleport things like pencils and rodents. The problem is they don't know where they go and they can't get them back. So they are going somewhere, and they are doing this. And this is just what I know about. And I haven't been in the industry for so long. I am sure that they have perfected in the basement of some Pentagon laboratory somewhere. They're down there working to perfect these things. I think we will have that. I think it'll be in our lifetimes. I think we are about to see the floodgate of technology that is possible made available to the general public through the what we're calling the disclosure. For me, the interesting thing when we talk about disclosure, and people are saying, well, are we alone in the universe and all that? I mean, we all know we're not. It's a big place. We're not the only ones. Every indigenous tradition has talked about our relationship to our cosmic family. Many of our viewers have experienced that relationship. What's exciting to me, I mean, that's all interesting, but what's exciting is the technology that we have had for over 70 years that has the potential to raise the standard of living for every human on the face of the earth without destroying the environment that supports us. There is a false narrative out there that better living is bad for the earth. That is just because of the path that has been chosen to get there over the last 100 years. It doesn't have to be that way. And we have had the technology for over 70 years to create forms of energy, medicine, healing, propulsion, transportation. We have all of that. And if it were made available, it would have made other industries obsolete. So it was money that prevented that from happening. And now that disclosure is on the horizon in all the ways that it is, with all of the leaks and the WikiLeaks and the whistleblowers, we're living a time of revelation. We're living a time when all things true are revealed. And this is true with every human relationship. It's true with every partnership. Every one of us who is listening is having, but perhaps most importantly, it's true within ourselves. We cannot hide from ourselves the truth of ourselves, our darkness, our fears. I think our greatest lessons, all the fluffy lessons from the 70s and the 80s, you know, those are all done. Any lessons you're working on in your life right now are core issues of self-worth, of abandonment, of separation, of attachment, of what it is that you fear and why you fear what you fear. And we have to heal those core issues within us in order to embrace the world that is before us. Because if we are hanging on to the core issues of not being worthy, then we're not going to be willing to accept what it is that's revealed to us. If we hang on to the core issues of all of our security is in our material possessions, then the world that stands before us that has a very, very different kind of vibe, we're not going to be open to accept that. So we're all going through deep healings, and it comes up in different ways. Some people it's marriages and divorces. Some people it's changing a career and a job. Some people it's you know, traveling the world and embracing life. I mean, whatever it is, but it's up, you know, for people right now. So yeah, so I think all of this is important, and I don't know exactly how it's going to come about, but I'll make a prediction right now. I think that the upcoming political election in the United States is opening such deep wounds and is opening the doors of so much controversy that will spill over into every facet of our lives, into the kind of economy that we have, our financial system, into science, into technology. And I think candidates are going to pull out all stops to convince people to elect them. And I think some of those will be the revelation of what has been hidden by governments in the past. And ultimately, I think we will benefit from that in the short term. The danger is if we allow ourselves to be torn apart as families, communities, and societies over the politics that are facing us. I have a video that is actually we're recording tomorrow on this very topic. So it's very fresh in my mind. And ultimately, I think good things will come from it. We've just got to have the soul compass and the deep knowing of who we are, so we don't get lost in the chaos as we get to those good things. I was talking to a friend the other night, Andy, and joking. I think we've discovered there's a lost planet called Chaos that is in a lost zodiac sign called Chaos, and I think Chaos. It's not enough to be in chaos. Now chaos is in retrograde. So we're in retrograde chaos, and that's where we are right now. I mean, everything is up for grabs, and we've got to stay focused and centered on the truth of who we are, so we don't get lost in the fear as we go through the chaos that we're living right now. So Andy, I am, we're already 20 after. Let's go to the bottom of the hour if you guys are good with it, and let's just, I'll go as fast as I can.
Okay, let's keep going. there's a good question in here. I don't know that I'm understanding all of the terms in it, which is from Ishika, which is, do you think human design, capital, and the gene keys tie in? Not sure.
Okay, so and a lot of people wouldn't. Human design is a system that was built back, and I know the man that co-developed it is why I'm familiar with it. It's a design, it's a system of helping us, helping people to navigate life and life's challenges based upon their unique genetic signatures and how those signatures relate to very cosmic principles. So that's human design. And the question is, do I think it is what, Andy?
Do you think human design and the gene keys tie in? What they tie into? I'm a little bit confused.
Yeah, I'm not sure either. But what I'll say is this: it's all related. It's all related. So the human design is based on genetic patterns. And what's really interesting about genetic patterns is that, so our DNA, so I'll just back up. We never really changed the DNA in our bodies. And I know a lot of people, and we use those terms, but technically, scientifically, it's not the DNA that's changing. It's the way the DNA is allowed to express in our bodies. What determines that is the DNA is wrapped with proteins in the nucleus of the cell. Those proteins are the result of the codes that we get from our parents. So if our parents live in a world, I'll just use myself as an example. My parents are the product of Jewish persecution and the Holocaust. My grandparents, I lost my grandparents in the Holocaust. And so that deep fear and all the things that go around that create protein patterns in the body so that my parents were able to survive that time in their lives. It served them. Though that fear served them at that time in their lives. Well, the way nature works is nature assumes that the child will live in the environment that the parent does. So the child receives the protein codes that help the parent survive. So when I'm born, for example, the protein that wraps around my DNA, it's called spooling, by the way, if this is what we're talking about. That protein, it will be wrapped tightly or loosely. The tighter it is, the less expressive the DNA can be. And there are things that are not able to be expressed. So if I do nothing to change my belief systems and lived the belief systems of my parents and my grandparents, then that spooling and those fears would be inherent in my life. The beauty is epigenetics. We have the opportunity to modify at will, on demand, our belief systems, and that will be reflected in the way those proteins allow our DNA to express. So the fears of my parents that serve them, and I got to tell you, early in life, I wish I knew then what I know now, because I went through a lot of hell early in life. And I made a choice, and I reached a point in my life where I had to understand this for myself. And I said, I love my parents, God bless them, and everything they did worked to get me where I am. It worked because I'm here. So it served me. And now I choose to outgrow the fears of my parents. As an individual, we are doing this as a generation. We are outgrowing the fears of our past because we don't want the new world to be based on those false assumptions and obsolete fears. And it takes one generation. There has to be a generation that does this, that lives in both worlds. And it takes a powerful, powerful soul to live this and to embrace the power of epigenetics to change our bodies in the presence of the world that we see without getting lost in that fear. It takes a really powerful generation, and that's where we are right now. And that's one of the reasons that I so appreciate Humanity's Team giving me and Nassim and Bruce and Len and everyone the opportunity to share what we share, because these are tools that will help us to do this in a healthy way. So, and I don't know that it's ever over. I will probably be learning about, those fears and the role that it influenced my early marriages, my early divorces, then my next marriages, then my next divorces, and it influenced my choice of careers, and it influenced my choice of education and all of those things, because that's the way life works. And once we recognize it, then we can consciously make the changes. And this is where we find our power and our highest levels of mastery, because we are only defined by our past if we choose to be defined by our past. And I know some people will say we're the product of our past, we're the product of past choices and experiences, but we don't have to be defined in the present by the hurt and the pain and the suffering of the past unless we choose to do that. And knowing that we have a choice is a big deal, because I have people in my family that believe we have no choice, that say we are who we are because of our past, and that's why things happen, in our lives. So they'll blame all the bad things happening in marriage and careers and health and everything. They'll blame that on the past. And because it's hard to accept the responsibility that comes with epigenetics for some people. And for other people, it's a tremendous joy and a tremendous release. And I'm hoping that Nassim and I have helped by showing the universal principles of the universe and how they apply, because we are part of the universe. If they apply in physics, they apply in our bodies. Holographic principles, fractal principles, entanglement principles, that's all part of epigenetics. So once you really get that, then it becomes actually kind of fun to apply them in your life and to watch your life morph and change as a result of conscious choices that free us from the bonds and the shackles of the fear of the past. So that's how I would answer. Let's do one more.
And also, oh, that was beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. Okay, one last one. And we're going to thank you, Deborah, for providing this last question. She says, greetings, Gregg. I've watched through module 3. And given that we of the field and create in the field, would you give a simple yet effective practice to influence your community around you and the world at large in a truly positive, peaceful manner?
Yeah, we do that in the course. And we can only influence the world around. I'll just go back to the single statement. We must become in our lives what we choose to experience in the world. So it's not like you're going to be here and influence somebody over there, because you are over there. You're the field. This is that fundamental shift in thinking. What you want to see in the field, you've got to become. So the technique is the technique of coherence. The field only knows chaos or coherence. Doesn't know a lot of justifications or fine gradations. And this, one of the examples I give, this is a perfect example. If you remember Occupy, remember when Occupy was happening, and it began with Occupy Wall Street, and then it applied to a bunch of other things. I caught a lot of flack, and people were really upset with me because I didn't support Occupy. Well, what were they asking me to support? They were angrily protesting, violent protesting in the streets against the 1%. Now I can share with you why, because the field only knows chaos or coherence. I understand the thinking, and I understand the frustration, and I stand with them about the inequalities. The protest was not the way, in my opinion, because you have to ask yourself every moment of every day, what am I feeding the field? So when those people were angrily protesting, or the Floyd protests, or January 6th, any of this stuff, what are we feeding the field? Even though it may be well-intentioned, are we feeding the field chaos, or are we feeding the field coherence? And that's all the field knows. And when you begin to think from that perspective, it informs you. At least you know. Now, what you choose from that is up to you. You can still go out and angrily protest and just know you're contributing to the chaos that is in the field that you're hoping that the protest changes. So the way to remedy all of that, and the technique is the technique that I'm offering in this course, is heart-brain coherence. We have a whole module, and we go through the technique step by step. I don't remember what module it's in, but that is the answer to that question. The coherence personal coherence is good and global coherence is really good. When we create the coherence for ourselves, we are feeding the field that influences the world. And what's really beautiful about this, I did not talk about this in the course, but there is a global community that has now built up around the practice of coherence on planet Earth that is developed over the last 20 years or so, since 1991. So it's longer than 20 years. And at some moment in time, somewhere on planet Earth, there are always groups of people who are creating coherence, feeding the field. It's happening. I mean, when we're asleep, people are doing it in Europe and in Asia. When they're asleep, people are doing it here and in Europe and Australia and Africa. And if you go to the HeartMath website, there is actually a map. And it's a live map where you can actually see there's a little bubble, little balloon that pops up for every time someone links onto the coherence app. Now, here's the thing that you don't know. What that little bubble shows is one computer who is linked in to the app. Behind that computer, there could be one person at 3 o'clock in the morning, or in the case in Tokyo, for example, there's a group of people that go to a movie theater every morning at 4 a.m. And at 4 a.m., and there are about 400 of them on average. So they only show up as one bubble, but there's 400 people behind that bubble. And we don't know how many in total. But what I can say is there are thousands of people every day that are creating coherence and feeding the field. And people have said to me, well, if it's so powerful, why do we have the world that we have? And what I say to them is you wouldn't want to be in the world where these people aren't there, because they're taking the rough edge off of the events. It doesn't stop anything from happening, but it helps us to have a softer landing and hopefully to make better choices in the field of coherence. So heart-brain coherence is the answer to the question. So thank you for that. Thank you for that's a good way to close our session today. And it was a good last question.
I completely agree. I think that was a perfect ending to it, of like kind of that summation of the heart-brain coherence at the core of all of it. I just want to thank you again, Gregg, for being here, being present, sharing your time, your vulnerability, your authenticity, your knowledge with us. Several people called you a walking encyclopedia, and I think that's incredibly accurate. You have incredible amounts of information. I do want to let you have your moment if you want to have any closing statement you want to give.
Well, I first want to take this opportunity. Those of you who are still with us live, how many people do we have live? We still have people with us live. Oh, wow. Well, thank you for my live community. And for those that watch this later, I want you to know, I'm just going to look you right in the eye. And I want to tell you, I want to say thank you for your trust in me and the SIM and Humanities team. I want to thank you for participating in this course. I know that my language may not be your language or everyone's language in the SIM, because we both come from a world of science and we get excited about those scientific concepts. So I appreciate you working with us to look beyond our shortcomings in terms of language and to really embrace the ideas and the concepts that we're sharing, but I believe help us to become the best version of ourselves and create the best world possible. So thank you for that. And I hope you've enjoyed the course as much as I enjoyed putting my portion together and working with Nassim to do his. It was a good opportunity for us to get together physically in a way that we had not before. And we both appreciate that, appreciate the impetus that came from building this course as a reason to do that. Humanities team, thank you for creating the platform and preserving our past work through the streaming platform that this now adds to, because it all tells a story. And I'll just invite people, if you've enjoyed this, you haven't checked out some of the past courses that I've done. And I'm also going to say these courses began before COVID. They began before we really developed some of the online streaming things to the degree that we have now. So the backgrounds look a little funny. During COVID, we couldn't get out. I didn't get a haircut for like 3 months. So that will always be preserved in our one of our courses there. But the story is there. And just want to say thank you to everyone. I love you all. Please stay in touch with Humanities Team, stay in touch with me. My website, greggbraden.com, GreggBraden.com. I'll fill you in on a secret. I've just been in talks with Gaia TV, and we have a new producer and may go back now to Missing Links, season 4, and we'll see what happens from there. I'm also very active in their Ancient Civilizations series. This is the 5th season. I'm in all 5 seasons, and we have an entire new season coming out about the 12,000 years ago, when the last time Earth went through the cycles that we're seeing now and the archaeological evidence. So I think you'll enjoy that. So it's a living body of information. There's a lot to do. I love you all. Thank you for your love and support. Andy, Russell, Jim, and I know Steve Farrell, you're not here today, but you're going to watch this. We love you, my brother. And thank you all. Look forward to our next.
Yes. Thank you everyone for being here. Thank you, Gregg. Just absolute love and blessings to all. Yes, we will be passing on these questions to Gregg. He may answer them on his YouTube channel if your question didn't get answered. And then also, yes, you will be getting a recording of this program sent to you in your email. Yeah, thank you, everyone. Blessed to be here.
Yeah, and Andy, I just want to clarify what you said. So you've got questions that were not answered. You'll send them to me. I'm going to look at them, and then I'll invite people to watch the YouTube channel. I may not get to all of them. I'll try to get to them to the best of my ability, but be on the official Gregg Braden YouTube channel. And Dee, I don't know, do you have a way on your platform to link into any of those YouTube videos, or does that work for you guys? Let's explore it.
We'll explore it.
We'll explore it. Okay. All right. We'll get back to you on that.
Sounds good.
All right. Take care, everyone. Have a beautiful day. Bye-bye.
Bye.